I won't say I have a bunch of experience in interviews. I gave like 5 interviews during my college admissions process, largely due to the fact that when your international interviews aren't essentially a requirement, as they are for domestic students. Like most domestic students are guaranteed an interview as long as it's available, but for international students it's not quite. So again, so it highly varies. Do not take an interview as an assurance that you will get admitted. I personally have been rejected by colleges that interviewed me, so don't take that as any confirmation, but it's a good sign. It's the fact that it shows that you're still on the table and you're still being evaluated. It's a good sign that you might have a chance. It doesn't essentially make sure that you get in. It doesn't. You may just be the borderline candidate that they're considering taking in, taking out, and that's why interviews is still important. Even among internationals, availability of interviews actually play in, because interviews are conducted by humans like us, and as such, they're sometimes alumni. For me, some of the interviewers were current students in those institutions, so they have busy schedules. Sometimes they fail to meet their schedules. Sometimes they fail to allocate enough time. So if you don't get an interview, it's perfectly fine. So there were essentially 2 types of interviews that I had to face. One, in the first type of interviews, I was given a brief idea of what we're going to talk about. So I had one of my interviewers for, I think, Princeton. He essentially said, you don't have to take preparations for these stuff. We're going to talk about this, and in the follow-up email, try to reply to me by stating 2 books that you like. So I got an idea from that we're going to talk about the 2 books that I like. We're going to talk about something else, just generally about me and stuff like that. The other type of interviews is just a point-blank shot, because they don't really mention about what they're going to talk about, and these are the ones that are a bit more scarier, sometimes a bit more difficult, because they don't exactly have a defined end and defined starting point of conversation. So it might take a while for you to get the hang of the conversation, but it's mostly fine. 2 things that I would recommend that you do in interviews is research on the school extensively. I made that mistake in my first interview. The interview said that you don't have to prepare anything and it's fine, it's gonna be fine, so you just come in and go out. It was simple, but I felt I could have done way better as a person, as in my interview. So what I learned from that interview onwards was that you remember the research that you do before you actually get into the college, as in, why do you think this college is important for you? You just have to do that research again and just say those things to the interviewer. The interviewer will sometimes even ask, why do you think institution X is great for you? Why did you want to apply here? What's the specific reason? And don't just give a generic reason like institution X is great, it's good and stuff like that. Rather, you give specific examples of what you wanted to do. For example, I think for some of the interviews I mentioned specifically name-dropped classes and professors who I wanted to listen to and work with in their labs. I talked about specific clubs that I wanted to be part of when I'm on campus, and so on and forth. I would like to believe that those things had some impact, and always have good questions to ask at the end of the interview. Remember, your questions shouldn't be something that's very easily answerable, that you can easily find on Google. Just ask subjective questions. For example, you can ask, what is the philosophy of the student culture like? I asked a few questions about a few professors once I saw that my interviewer were of a particular major I could take classes in, and try to use that question as a way to further probe the interviewer and carry on the conversation. So one thing that I really found funny was the fact that by asking them, like, we had finished the formal interview by like 25 minutes, but after that formal interview, when the interviewer asked me to ask them if I had any questions about that institution, I started asking him, and that itself launched ourselves into another conversation, which took on for like an hour or two more. So like use that opportunity to build that rapport with your interviewer, and try to see what topics they like to talk about, what topics they're knowledgeable about, and try to ask subjective questions. That's going to help you. So by the end of the admission cycle, I was admitted into 3 amazing schools: Stanford, Princeton, and Duke. I easily shifted to choosing between Stanford and Princeton because my expected family contribution at these 2 institutions was almost half of that was at Duke. So financially, it was more feasible for me to apply to enroll in either Stanford or Princeton. Stanford, it was a very difficult decision for me to make because both of these schools are amazing institutions who have an amazing teaching faculty. Those are well-endowed resources, and that's why it was a very difficult decision for me to make. There were also 2 campuses, both their campuses were bubbles, so it didn't really make much of a difference in terms of location or external factors. The weather at Stanford is much better, but personally weather didn't make a huge impact on my decision, so I didn't really consider that, though I could see that it could be an important for some people out there. I chose Stanford largely due to the reasons that were intrinsically related to my prospective major. I had this conversation with myself where I decided that had I been interested in a different major, I would have highly likely chosen Princeton over Stanford, but due to my major, I felt Stanford provided me with greater opportunities, and that's why I chose it. So the reasons for that are as follows. Number 1, so as I've already mentioned, I am majoring in some place related to biological sciences. At Stanford, I felt that there was a wider number of majors I could choose from. There were majors in human biology, but there are also majors in intersections of biology and technology. So like there were majors such as bioengineering, there were majors such as biomedical engineering, there were majors such as biocomputation, which is a combination of biology and computer science. There was even a unique major at Stanford called symbolic systems, which is a combination of cognitive science and computer science. So like Stanford had much larger variety of majors I could take. Princeton did have different majors, but at that moment I was interested in only 2 majors that Princeton offered. It had chemical and biological engineering, and it had biology as a standalone major. So like that concentration, that's what they call it. So like I felt the academic offerings at Stanford were greater than at Princeton, so that was one plus point that Stanford had. Another thing was Stanford had a huge graduate school, and it had its own school of medicine. So one of the reasons I chose Stanford was because thanks to the huge graduate school that it has, it opens up much greater number of electives and specializations that I could pursue. So at Stanford, there were unique courses taught by faculty from the graduate schools. So there were much more interesting and niche electives at Stanford I could pursue thanks to the availability of graduate school, of a large number of graduate schools at Stanford. So that was another plus point that Stanford had over Princeton. Another thing that I was interested in was research. As a STEM major, I realized that research was something that I was going to be inevitably part of. But what varied between these 2 institutions was A, the type of research involved, and B, the amounts of each type of research involved. So I conversed heavily with students from Princeton and Stanford regarding research. From what I learned from them was most of the research, at least in biology, that took place at Princeton was more of a fundamentalist in nature. It was related to proteins, fundamental properties of biomolecules, and so on and so forth, which is not a bad field of research. It's as good as on its own. At Stanford, on the other hand, most of the research took place at the forefront of innovation that was more like at the intersection of between the biological sciences and current technologies. It had a more pragmatic taste to it, so as to speak. for example, they were developing new medical technologies to help alleviate medical crisis. They were developing new medical innovations and drugs and so on and forth. You can already see a bit about that from their COVID-19 response team. The Stanford has launched a lot of different initiatives to respond to the COVID-19 crisis, especially its bioengineering faculty. So you can check that out to give a glimpse of what offerings, pragmatic offerings that Stanford provides. And Stanford did have a bit of fundamentalist research going on as well, but I felt there was a wider variety of different research types at Stanford than at Princeton. And I was a bit more interested in the innovation and application side of things rather than the fundamentalist nature of research. None of them is bad, but it varies from person to person as to which one they're interested in, and I felt more interested in the application portions. That's why Stanford has a greater plus point. Another thing, Stanford felt like it had more interdisciplinary opportunities. As I've already said, there are interdisciplinary courses such as biomedical innovation. There are interdisciplinary institutes as well, and Stanford had many of them. One of them, what's notable to me that I found very interesting, was BioX, the institute called BioX, where they essentially bring majors from different schools of the Stanford University, and they work together on many unique projects that combine the schools across different disciplines. So like, I felt Princeton did have a few of these. I'm not saying Princeton didn't have, Princeton definitely did, but Stanford had more of that. Another thing that really stood out for Stanford was its quarter system. I've heard a lot of varying opinions about the quarter system, honestly. Some say it's very fast-paced, some say its midterms creep up too quickly, it's very difficult for them to take to absorb the pace of it. But I personally felt that the quarter system gave me great amounts of versatility, and if you've been catching my drift, I really love versatility in terms of academic offerings. So like, I felt it gave me more freedom to choose different subjects that I was keen on. Like, I currently can choose, I have, even among majors that are very unit extensive, there are plenty of opportunities for you to learn across different topics, and there's enough flexibility for you to pursue other subjects as well. So like, you can do that thanks to the quarter system. It's versatile, it gives you more freedom to choose subjects that you've always wanted to learn but was never offered in your original school in high school. Another thing that I felt was good about Stanford was that they have a co-term program. So if you're applying to Stanford, you can apply for a master's within the 4 years of your earning your bachelor's degree. There are requirements to the co-term program. You can't get that master's immediately. You have to fulfill some prerequisites, but you can co-term in a subject. That is, you can get a master's degree within those 4 years. Most people get the master's degree in a 5th year outside that 4th year. One thing that I really felt Stanford has, and it varies from year to year, I realize that, but like this year, what I felt, that the cohort of people that was admitted into Stanford felt more lively and energetic, so as to speak. I realize how subjective this might be, and of course different people might have different interpretations of what that cohort looks like. I know people who got into Stanford but chose Princeton instead, even among STEM, so like, yeah, you can see how subjective these opinions are, but like, I personally felt the batch was more lively and more welcoming, so that's why I felt more confident in my choice to rather stay in with Stanford than with Princeton. Of course, I'm not saying Princeton was lacking in any way, but rather I just felt I was more attracted to Stanford more than Princeton. I do acknowledge there are a few things I lost out on while choosing Stanford. I do agree that I do feel that Princeton has a greater undergraduate focus, thanks to not having as big as the graduate school at Stanford does, and that undergraduate focus means greater number of opportunities it's more easier to get involved in research in some cases at Princeton. So if you're someone who really values that, you should. I also felt Princeton had a greater South Asian community, a greater sense of South Asian community. There were more clubs related to that, more than Stanford. Not saying that Stanford doesn't have them, but Princeton's one felt stronger. So yeah, if you're really into that thing, I felt that community aspect could still be supplemented by the more energetic and lively batch cohort I had at Stanford. but you at the end of the day make your own decision. So consider these facts, consider these before making that decision yourself. Again, a lot of this is based on my subjective opinion, so take everything with a pinch of salt and try to contextualize the situation according to your particular scenario. I hope you guys found it helpful, and stay safe and be well. Bye bye.